Hello, 2024 Africa Liberty Camp Conference members. I am so excited to see you. I'm so glad you're here. I hope the conference has been wonderful so far and that you've learned a lot. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm excited to talk to you about the fundamental principles of voluntarism, because if you want to have prosperity and you want to have economic development, you need to have your consent respected and you need to have property rights. So we're going to be talking about that today here at the conference. And I'm going to give you a little bit about me first. I am Jack Lloyd. I have a Bachelor of Science in Public Relations and Business. I have a JD, that's a Juris Doctor, a law doctorate. I'm a former criminal defense lawyer, state school teacher, and tutoring company owner. And now I'm a producer for Liberty. So I do a lot of work to help spread liberty around the world, just like this conference here. I have 3 nonfiction books on the principles of liberty. I have an unschooling book, a children's book on the most libertarian educational practice. I'm a producer for the online personality, The Philosopher. And I actually also have a comic book series. I know it seems like a lot already, but like doing a lot of things that I write, I letter, and I produce for, called Voluntarism comic series. And on top of that, I also do music and music videos as a vocalist and producer with The Philosopher. And as you can see here, there's some of those things there that you can see that we've done, from the comic book series to nonfiction books. And there's some fun stills down below from some of our music videos, which you can check out later. And on top of that, we also have, the kids book there, and there's a little still from our podcasting that we do together. It's a lot of fun, and we really enjoy engaging the culture in many ways. All right. So why does consent matter, right? A big part of what we're talking about here is, why is this even important to you? So consent is what meters ethical human behavior, right? It's impossible to want your consent to be violated, because if you want something, the act of wanting is consenting to it, right? Just like you say, hey, I want to have an ice cream. Here's some money. And then you trade, and there you go. You got your ice cream. They got their money. That's your consenting behavior. If you don't have your consent respected, right, that means someone's taking from you, or maybe, they're punching you, right? That kind of thing. They're battering you without your consent. But if you do a fight ring, like a boxing match, then you do consent to the boxing match, right? So there's a big difference between having your consent respected versus having it not respected. And we definitely know what that looks like in many areas of life. We don't have our consent respected, when things are taken from us, or we're touched without our consent. So everyone, everywhere, inescapably wants to have their consent respected, and especially so starting with their body. So this cross-cultural similarity in relationship-specific social touching, that is this idea of who can touch you where, this or that, this is a pretty universal thing. There's actually several studies, and I just pulled up one image from one of them that you can see, where there's a study done about people who whether they want to be touched on their arms, their legs, this or that. They asked different people whether they want to be touched, and based on the social relationship, how far out they are, whether they're a total stranger or whether they're an intimate partner, people across the world generally had a similar idea that, they want their consent respected, and they don't just want anybody touching them, right? So this idea is actually also observable. It's not just something that we can talk about and you can, think about in your own life and your own self, but people have actually studied this idea of wanting their consent respected and their body respected. So it's pretty common across the world. People have a lot of similar ideas about where they don't want to be touched without consent. So what does voluntarism mean for consent? Voluntarism is the framework for consent ethics, right? It's this framework that allows us to think about what it means to have consent, what it means to accurately interpret consent, that kind of thing. And consent's really important. We want to make sure that when we are consenting, it's clear, and when we're not consenting, it's clear. And we want to have social norms that clearly indicate whether consent was violated or not, right? You want to make it extra clear so that responsibility for doing something harmful can be accurately placed. So for voluntarism to work, for this consent-oriented thinking to work, we need a backdrop of what's called property rights. So property rights are ideas that are held in people's mind. They're not self-executing. So what we mean here is that when you think about you owning something, right, there's no magical force field that automatically protects what you have. If you have, a spoon that's yours or something, there's no force field that's going to immediately stop anybody that tries to take your spoon from you. It's not going to automatically come back to you, if someone runs away with your spoon. So property rights are actually ideas that people need to adopt in their minds, which means it's psychological. Right? Property rights don't automatically, enforce themselves. People do. So when we think about property rights, we're thinking about a psychology, and we're thinking about people sharing this idea, sharing this cultural respect. And the property rights concepts begin with the concept of self-ownership. So self-ownership is the idea that you as an individual have the highest right of claim to your body as compared to others, right? You as an individual get to say whether someone touches your body or doesn't touch your body, whether they can, have a kiss or not have a kiss, right? Otherwise, it's going to be something bad like, sexual assault. You don't want to have that. So you have the right to say who can or cannot touch you at the core of this philosophy. Your consent is what determines whether something can or can't happen as to your body. And with self-ownership, that's derived from your consciousness and your mind. It extends to control over your body, right? So when we think about the brain and the idea of, you thinking and that stuff, that's all happening up in between your ears, right? It's in your brain, and the impulses there, the electric signals go across your body. And we can see that, right? You could study and observe the consciousness of the mind and how your mind determines whether your fingers move or your toes and this kind of thing. So we understand the impulses on the body, and that locus of consciousness, that is where our self-ownership begins over our physical bodies. And because of that, the only way to ethically remove or sever those impulses is when it's done voluntarily, right? So if someone tries to take your blood without your consent, maybe they're a vampire, but that would be a violation of your bodily property rights. But if you choose to donate blood, right, you give blood voluntarily to someone in need, that's okay. You're removing the blood from the control of your body. Or maybe you're donating an organ, some people do that. But again, if you're having an organ donated, that is done voluntarily. You're choosing to remove it away from the control of your brain. So this self-ownership idea, this property rights idea, springs from our consciousness and our bodies, and we control that. And we want that to be respected because everybody, by default, natural default, wants to have their consent respected to their own bodies. So why do these property rights fundamentally matter, right? If you did not have property rights, then anyone could use your body as they see fit and others would go along with it, right? If someone's like, oh, you know what? I want to have sex with you. And you're like, no, I don't want that. But they force themselves on you. And then you'd have rape and you'd have no consequences from it. You'd have no socially respected right to stop someone from hitting you, or people generally didn't believe in property rights. And that's very scary, right? You don't want to live in a world where people don't respect your body, where someone could just punch you or stab you or try to sexually assault you, and get away with it easily. You want to be like, hey, let's respect each other so that we all can share in our respected bodily property rights. So the more property rights are respected, the more observable peace there is, because people do not touch each other or take from each other without mutual understanding, right? So property rights matter because it helps de-escalate violence and people being hurt and taken from, because people respect each other. They're not damaging each other's bodies. They're not damaging each other's homes. And so if you have property rights being respected, you have generally more peace. So property rights, of course, do go past the body, right? We can't just have the body and it just exists abstractly. We exist in space and time. We need land to stand on. At a minimum, you got to stand somewhere. You need food, you need air and water. Otherwise, you die. And there's, nothing after that if you're dead. So we need to have property rights past the body so that we can feed ourselves and exist. And when it comes to property rights outside the body, we have to deal with this issue called scarcity, right? Which means that the things that we need, they cannot be used by all people at all times without denying others use. So, for example, if you have a sandwich in your hand, you're going to eat it, right? Someone else can't also eat that sandwich. Otherwise, you won't have the sandwich. It'll go into their mouth. It'll get digested in their belly. And then you'll have no sandwich if they take your sandwich, right? So we need to have this idea of scarcity understood, so that way people are like, oh, okay, right, this is a scarce physical thing. This is my sandwich and no one else can take it, because otherwise I'm going to be deprived of my sandwich. And so in libertarian voluntarist theory, we think about this in the homesteading principle or first appropriation, where we establish ownership on unowned things, right? If there is just land and no one had claimed it, and you see a tree and it's just growing an apple, you could pluck that apple from the tree and eat it because nobody else owned it. Nobody else, created it or set it off, that kind of thing. But for owned items, that is, someone already owns something, we need voluntary trade or gift for that to be ethical, right? If you own a cell phone you can't have someone come and just rip that cell phone out of your hand and be like, whoa, hey, you stole my cell phone, right? The cell phone needs to either be voluntarily traded for or you give it to someone as a present. Otherwise, your consent is violated. So if we don't have those things, then we have the violence that comes from what as theft or robbery. And we don't want to have that if we want our bodies respected and our stuff respected. So consent matters because everyone wants to have their consent respected by natural default, right? So that's why it fundamentally matters. Everybody really cannot want their consent to be violated because, again, to want something is to want it to happen, right? And so you consent to it. But everybody might have different ideas about what they can or can't consent to. So we need to ground that in property rights. We need to share common values about consent and the scope of what we consent to with property rights, starting with self-ownership, and then to outside property based on homesteading or trade, so that we can reduce the conflict over scarce resources. And the more property rights through consent are respected, the more observable peace we have in the world, because people are no longer fighting each other physically or stealing from each other or stabbing each other or murdering each other. They're respecting each other's bodies, they respect each other's homes and things like that. So if you want to be an agent for change and peace and promote the respect and consent through property rights, you can. It's just a matter of thinking about consent, how to increase that, how to respect it and understand it, and look for ways to maximize that in terms of looking to get consent and everything. It's very important. And my books that you saw in the beginning do cover those things. My 3 nonfiction books cover the foundations of those, and you can definitely read up on those in the ALID library. So the Action for Liberty and Economic Development Library, they have a set of my books there. So if you want to read up on that, definitely check it on out. And of course, you can check it out online as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening. I really appreciate you listening to this presentation and understanding why consent matters, and just getting rooted back in the basics that consent really is what meters ethical behavior. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming to this presentation, and I'll hopefully see you next time and maybe catch up with you after you've read my books. Take care, everybody.